Hello, Assalamu alaikum, and welcome to another episode of the Legal Innovation and Technology webinar series. This is episode 16, and today's topic is going to be about the invisible backbone, which is spectrum management and building the smart Bangladesh vision. Um, I know a lot of people might not be aware of this fact about the importance and the significance of spectrum and how it actually connects all of us wirelessly. And it is often overlooked or misunderstood by many. But it is the silent powerhouse, as sometimes some experts call it. It is the secret sauce to driving us towards this digital world. And Spectrum is actually the foundation of our digital ecosystem, and it is essential for everything from mobile communication to broadcasting to Internet of Things and the emerging frontier technologies like 5Gs and beyond that. And What to expect from this webinar today is that we are going to explore the key areas where law, innovation, and technology can work together to help give our audience an idea about the significance of spectrum management, which is undoubtedly the invisible backbone of our digital economy, especially when we have the vision to be a smart Bangladesh, and how effectively managing this valuable resource can accelerate this journey for Bangladesh. And It's a huge topic. We won't be able to cover everything in one episode. However, we will discuss what is spectrum management and why it's so critical for our country's development. We will talk about, how does this spectrum management fit with the vision of Smart Bangladesh, and what are the challenges that we might face as a country to have, to effectively manage the spectrum, and what technologies can be leveraged to optimize spectrum utilization, and the role of the government and the regulators that can play in making this work. Those of you who are joining us for the first time, I'm Barrister Dasnua Shelley. I'm a legal professional for over 18 years with expertise for having law, technology, and business. And With me today to discuss about this very important topic, and we have an expert who is Scott. Scott Meinhein, he is an international regulatory and strategy lawyer, economist for over 35 years all over the world, almost like Australia, Asia, Pacific telecommunication regulators, many international organizations you've worked with, ITU, World Bank, IFC, USAID, ASEAN, APT, EPEC, and many more. Some of the remarkable role that Scott has played in this particular area is the ASEAN Digital Master Plan for 2025. You helped prepare that. You also assisted in the GCMA preparation of the roadmaps for awarding 5G spectrum for Indonesia, Thailand, Vietnam, and you've worked on reports on 5G readiness for major Asian and African countries. And Like I said, your current project is very interesting as well, where you're working on the spectrum management for Philippines, and also you're helping them draft the new Radio Communication Act for that country. He's a member of the Telecommunication Society of Australia and International Telecommunication Society. I mean, I could go on giving how your area of expertise, giving your career of over 35 years, but I think I'll stop here. And I want to thank you for giving us your time and helping us understand this very crucial uh, area, spectrum, and it's how to manage this for almost every country, which is very crucial for the development of each and every country. Before I ask you questions, I was actually looking forward to having you here in Bangladesh, actually, like around this time, because the symposium on spectrum management 2024 was supposed to be held in Bangladesh on the 29th and 31st of July. However, due to the current situation, it had to be postponed. And it kind of, has me thinking and reflecting back that, how important this is, and how crucial it is to efficiently have spectrum management for the development of technologies, and particularly for Bangladesh, because of what we have seen in the past. And I will not talk anymore because you're the expert and we want to hear from you. So, why don't we start with the basics, Scott, from you? And, you know,
Sure.
what is spectrum and why it's crucial for a country's development?
Sure, sure. Look, thank you very much for the introduction. You were very kind in all of your comments. Yes, it's very unfortunate. I had planned to have a week in Dakar, and many things are out of our control. So unfortunately, it wasn't possible. But yeah, I'd been asked to speak at the Asia Pacific Telecommunity Conference, which is actually the first time it's being held in 6 years, because it normally is held every few years, but because of the pandemic, it's now been postponed again. But hopefully, it returns to Dakar in the next month or two, and let's hope that that
Fingers
takes.
crossed. Fingers crossed for that.
Indeed, and look. Let me talk a little bit about spectrum, and yeah, it's a bit scary when you think of 35 years, but I was as a young graduate involved in looking at spectrum issues because Australia was the first country outside of Europe to support GSM. So we made the first decision in Australia to support GSM because it allowed competition. It allowed at least three up to five operators at that stage, and that's why we moved away from US technologies, amps and deamps, for those people who are probably not familiar with those technologies, which only allowed a duopoly in those markets. And competition was very, very important as part of that process. But look, what I do want to start though, when we talk about spectrum, it's about electromagnetic waves. It's about physics. So you might need to bone up a little bit, but I think the key thing about radio communications is that it's not just about telecommunications. And even your introductory comments are all about spectrum used in telecommunications, when it's actually a much broader area. And we use many radio communications devices. And if you think about GPS, you think about listening to the radio 104 on the dial. If you think about a whole range of every time you fly, every time you hop in a boat, there's a whole range of different things where radio communications. So, and I've seen this in a few countries. The Philippines was trying to regulate some things, but it was all about telecoms. When actually you need a foundation to think about radio communications, and telecommunications sits in part of that. So, I think that's the first thing to say to your listeners, that don't just focus just on radio comms in telecoms. And so all of those things are really important because the demand that we see for more spectrum in telecoms is actually also reflected in other parts of the economy. People want to use Internet of Things, they want to use radio tracking devices, they want to use all these other things. So demand is across the board for more and more spectrum usage. And I think the second thing I wanted to talk about is, and I've been asked this at many conferences, and people say to me, "Oh, maybe in Bangladesh, if I was there, being there this week, it's like, oh, the US has more spectrum than we do." Actually, you don't. Every country has exactly the same amount of spectrum. It's how you manage it that's really, really important. And and in Australia, other parts of the world, how you manage that is really what I describe as the secret sauce to the digital economy, but also to having a modern functioning economy as part of that process. And I think the key thing about spectrum is it is really can be a bit of a magic pudding, in the sense that it's one of those natural resources a country has that doesn't change. You use it today, but you've got exactly the same amount tomorrow as part of that process. And if you don't use it today, you've lost something as part of that process. So maximizing that utility from an economics perspective is really, really key, as part of that process. And so that's not to say that you can make poor decisions about how you manage it and how you use it, because that management is the key part of the discussion point. So it can be divided in many, many ways. It can be, so the key thing, national public resource, it's not exhaustible as a national resource, but it needs to be managed. It can be divided into frequencies, time, angle of arrival, polarization, geography, and uses. And it has all of these other uses. So it's very much something that is important, that you manage it well. And then you have the legal structures and the subsidiary regulations to try and achieve that process.
I actually had no idea that it was a natural resource that every country has it, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
And it is then very crucial for us to make sure that it is managed well and it
Mm-hmm.
is used for the development, because nowadays we see how technology can be used for to improve your lives, but it can also bring some challenges with it. And you have to address both. So why don't we kind of see that we have established that spectrum is a natural resource, every country has it, so Bangladesh has it.
Mm-hmm.
And we have been using it. And right now it's more important for us to make sure that we manage it well and effectively, because of the new vision that we have, like
Mm-hmm.
to become smart Bangladesh in a
Mm-hmm.
sustainable way. So
Yep.
how do you think this spectrum management, and the fact that Bangladesh is very being so ambitious that we have plans to be smart nation by 2041. So I can totally see that spectrum management must fit into this vision, and to make it a reality. How
Mm-hmm.
do you think? How do you think it's
Sure,
gonna?
sure. Look, I think that's a really good question, and I think the first thing, I spoke generally, and what you're really focusing in though is on what we call the sweet spot, as it were, for
Sweet
telecommunications.
spot.
Right. So, and the beauty we have is that sweet spot's getting bigger, in the sense that with new technologies, it used to be, say, between 500 megahertz and 3 gigahertz. So we had about 2,500 gigahertz to manage in this sweet spot. And now, because of new technologies, we're probably from 500 up to 7 gigahertz with new technologies. And that how you manage that is what's really the focus in terms of telecommunications, and getting that. And why is it the sweet spot? Because I think that's the other element that your listeners might need to understand, is that's where there's a good trade-off between coverage and capacity, right? So at the lower frequencies, you can actually send a signal right around the world, and that's how many military communicate with submarines. Very low bit rates, but you can actually bounce it off the ionosphere as part of that process. But as you go up higher, you have this propagation shrinks, so the cell size gets smaller, that we would say, but the capacity to deliver more data on that in that cell goes up. So what we have is this sweet spot where effectively it makes economic sense to deploy the network so that customers can get a good service, but it's a worthwhile service as part of that process. So that management is the key thing for Bangladesh. Now, what's occurred in the past in Bangladesh is, and it's a transition in many countries, whether it's France, the US, or whatever. Government was a big user. The military was a big user, right? And so, therefore, part of the transition process is often about freeing up that spectrum, what we call refarming. It sounds a bit weird, but refarming the spectrum so that it's like putting in another crop. And part of that process is changing that use of that technology, because it's in high demand. We therefore need to change its use so that we get the maximum benefit for the economy. And there's some really good studies that I could reference. I won't do it on the discussion today, but if your listeners wanted, there's a lot of really important studies done by the ITU, the World Bank, which shows if you get that right, you actually get benefits to the economy, and you get them even more so for emerging markets. So, to use that US expression, you get a lot of bang for buck. you effectively, by doing things well with mobile broadband, you get this economic advantage as part of that process. And so it's a very worthwhile thing to do. So, but what I would say historically, or the challenge in Bangladesh, is that you've had very high spectrum prices for this mobile spectrum in the past, and that has meant, I think, a couple of things. The first one is that you know to make, because it's so expensive, then the number of operators who can afford it is actually small, right? And there are real benefits from being the dominant player in a particular market or the largest player. And then you have this challenge because new technology effectively means that you need bigger bandwidths, right? So if you think about building a building, and I've been to Dhaka a few times, you see a lot of houses that have the steel poking up the top to build the next floor of the house when people get enough money as part of that process. But if you want to build a big building, you need a big piece of land. And so what's occurred in moving from 2G to 3G to 4G to 5G is the block of land needs to be more. So the block of spectrum needs to be larger. So when you first started in a voice world, you could manage with 1 or 2 megahertz of technology. Then the 2G world. Then we moved to the 3G world where everything's in 5 megahertz blocks. Then we move to 4G with LTE. It really works optimally with 20 megahertz. Then when we talk about 5G, we really, for mid-band, which is up to sort of like between 1 and 7 gigahertz, we really need 100 megahertz to get the efficiencies. And then when we talk about millimeter wave, high frequency, it's normally done in 400 megahertz blocks. So what you have is this challenge that in the past, you might have paid a certain number of taka for spectrum, or and but now you need a lot more of it, and you therefore the average price per megahertz per pop, as we say, per population, needs to fall over time because you don't get as much value in terms of revenue from that additional spectrum. People don't, they get faster speeds, but they don't pay more for their service as part of that process. And so that's the big challenge, I think, for Bangladesh, that pricing needs to reflect this new technology reality. And if that doesn't happen, you end up with a scenario where competition's affected. And what you see in markets as a good example with Thailand is Thailand had very high prices. They had an auction which probably the government at the time thought was perfectly timed in March of 2020. And they got a very large sum of money, but then the pandemic hit. So the operators then lost all those roaming revenues from tourists coming into Thailand. And so what's then occurred is a consolidation. So one of the big players in your market, in Grameenphone, which is partly owned by Telenor, DTAC in Thailand, couldn't afford to buy that spectrum. So it's now merged with AIS, with TrueMove as part of the process. And so you've now got a situation in Thailand where you effectively only have 2 operators. And with 2 operators, you actually can't really auction spectrum anymore because there's not the demand. So it's that classic example of killing the milking cow, that you have a great feast, but you then lose that milk that you would get all the time as part of the process. And that's what happens. So that if you charge too much for spectrum, you effectively kill the competition, which then drove the demand for the spectrum. And this is a big challenge right across both Southeast Asia, but certainly in South Asia. So we have a scenario even in Indonesia where there's studies now about trying to make the pricing fall. We have obviously what's happened in India. Very high prices have created a situation where Jio is doing very, very well, but the government's had to even convert spectrum prices to shares in some of the other operators to make sure that they're viable and the competition continues. And so, that's the big challenge, I think, for Bangladesh, to have very reasonable prices to encourage that investment. During the pandemic, I was very fortunate. I was engaged by the World Bank. We did a work on 5G readiness for Pakistan. Now, I think Pakistan is behind its little brother um, in Bangladesh as part of that process. And but one of the things that came out of that too is it's not just about spectrum. So spectrum's the key part, but then you need to do other things like backhaul, more fiber, all the rest of it, because it's like building a big building, but if you don't have utilities to it, if you don't have power, you don't have water, you don't have telecoms, then it's not a great place to be, right? And I think that's the key point there, that the other elements to this backbone that you refer to is about making that fiber backbone to those base stations to support 5G, to support that spectrum, need to also be dimensioned properly as part of the process. So, but having said that, I think you've done some really good things. I think there's some recognition in government from where I sit, and I'm not involved, obviously, engaged in the market. But you've seen some more flexibility about spectrum pricing. You've seen lower prices compared with the past. You have a greater understanding of those issues are really important. And operators are just not going to invest if they don't have enough spectrum to make it a viable service, right, as part of that process. And I suppose just one example, and then I'll hand back to you. But if you got if you for me, yes, I upgrade my phone and I do that regularly. But for other listeners, maybe people in Bangladesh, to spend another $100 to get a 5G phone, it has to really make their value to them. What we in economics terms call it must have a good consumer surplus. And if you're just saying, well, we're going to 5G and you have a little 5G on the top of your phone, but you get no increase in speed or you don't get any other benefits, why would you invest that money? And I think that's the challenge in many markets. Like the Philippines has what I describe as fake 5G. It's 5G there, but it doesn't have the compelling speeds or the compelling quality of service that you'd expect in making that transition. So, if you do 5G well, you'll get 400, 500, up to a gigabit type of speeds to your mobile as part of that process, and to some of the other services that 5G supports, like fixed wireless access, which I think has also been some announcements earlier in this year in Bangladesh, but more to come in that space.
I mean, there is so much to this. I mean, to put it in really simple words, spectrum is a natural resource which is obviously owned by the government. And it is up to the government how they will allocate this resource to effectively manage so that actually the people can get access to it. And of course, there is a lot of process you need to do, fiber optics, these bandwidths. Of course, that's when these telecom operators come in place. I'm
Mm-hmm.
glad you mentioned that because I think that's where we first met 15 years ago when we
Mm-hmm.
were both working for telco, and we were trying to get those licensings because there were auctions going on, and let's face it, in Bangladesh this particular market is heavily regulated. And we have seen these telecom companies, they actually cannot do much without getting approval from the regulatory body in Bangladesh, which we know is the BTRC. And there is one main act, the Bangladesh Telecommunication Regulation Act, which is the main and the primary act in Bangladesh for the telcos, for managing spectrum, giving licenses, 3Gs, 4Gs, how they're going to be distributed, what are going to be the pricing that they're going to be fixing, how many players are going to be in the market for this, to provide this service, to make this service available to
Mm-hmm.
everyone in this country. And of course, if I cannot afford a smartphone, I mean, 5G doesn't mean anything to me.
Mm-hmm.
If I can only afford an analog phone, I'm not going to be even using it. So you've rightly connected that. I think the purchasing power of the people in the country, and whether which in in other words, meets may makes sure that there's demand for 5G. It's there's no demand for it. I mean,
mm,
why would a company invest so much in getting that license from the regulator? Because they obviously have to get that money back into for the amount of money that they've invested in getting that 5G license. And
mm.
also, if we say it's 5G, but then again, the speed is not 5G, then again, that's not the
Sure,
what's the
sure.
point of paying this premium price? But right now, I mean, we are going through the transition, like, give us speed, give us some connection. I think every single person in Bangladesh in the recent times have lived the life without internet, like we were back in the 90s. And now that we're having some sort of internet back, but it's not, like I said, the bandwidth is important. Not that many
Mm,
people realized it, and
mm,
and it has a lot to do with the speed, how they're being managed, and
mm,
it also has to do with the device that you're connected with, like we talked about at the beginning. Like, wireless connections has everything to do with mobile communications to Internet of Things to everything. And
mm,
I think everyone is facing that, or like those who did not understand why it's happening.
mm,
It's saying I'm connected to internet, but why isn't my Gmail opening? It's because of the bandwidth.
mhm,
It's more bandwidth. So now people are trying to understand what it means. Probably before, they even if they had that idea, they did not understand. And
mm,
because you have been in this area, and
mm,
we understand it's heavily regulated, I guess rightly so. You have to understand the demand supply. And I also see that a lot of new technologies are now coming in place that was not there when we first met, like 15 years ago. And so is there any way for because Bangladesh, like I said, we have that vision to be smart. We want to
mm.
leverage all the new technologies, frontier technologies that are
Yeah,
coming, these emerging technologies, and how can Bangladesh leverage using these new emerging frontier technologies to optimize spectrum utilization? And I know it has a lot to do with the supply and demand. Like, if there's no demand, then what's the point? But from a government, from a country's perspective, especially when the government has that vision,
mm,
so how can these technologies help us to
sure,
utilize it the best way?
sure. Okay, well, I think you made a lot of points. Let me try and unpack that a little bit. I think firstly, let's understand that every country regulates spectrum, right? And Bangladesh is not unique in that
That's
perspective.
true. That's true. Yeah.
And and I think we're going to see even more regulation in part because I don't see the future. I see governments and public safety being very concerned about drone technology, for example, a new technology as part of
Yeah.
that process. But yeah, look, I think the first thing is you know you've got to have some faith in the market. And when I first got involved in Bangladesh 15 years ago, it was for the ITU, the International Telecoms Union, and I was actually looking at competition issues in the market. And I think that's really the key. That there should be probably a little bit more trust of the BTRC. That if you've done the work on structuring the market properly, then competition should help regulate things. You don't need to intervene, perhaps as much as they do. But maybe that's a confidence thing. So over time, maybe that can come off. And I think that's really important because what I would say to you and your listeners is, you know, you can't stop technology, and and I think this is really important that, I have lived 2G, 3G, 4G, 5G, and I make the joke that I have one more G in me before I hopefully am retired, and 6G is not that far away. Actually, we're
Lucky
planning.
seven. Go up to 7G.
Yeah, well, 7G, well, it sounds like 007, but no. So in 2030, we're expecting 6G as part of the process. So 5G advanced is now 2025. China is already deploying that, and we're seeing that in many other markets. 2030, we have to plan for 6G as we speak. And What that means though is, unfortunately, people do need to do a bit of a transition. It's very expensive for an operator to run 2G, 3G, 4G, and 5G together as part of that process. And part of that is not just having the spectrum, which is very expensive in Bangladesh, but also having the equipment, the spares, the skill sets. 2G is now 25 years old. So none of the young engineers want to work on something that's 25 years old. They want the latest, sexiest new technologies that you've just been describing, and how AI is going to do something with the Internet of Things, right? And so all of that means that you have to do some switch offs. So in various markets, you will see some. You won't be analog. Analog switched off a long time ago. You said analog phone. There are no analog phones, right? They're all digital. The question is whether they're smart, or whatever the process is. So what you've got to do though is you've got to say, well, is 2G to switch off or is 3G? So what we're seeing in many markets, Indonesia, Vietnam will switch off all of its 2G network in September of this year. Australia has already switched off 2G, and 3G will also switch off and started to switch off. So by Christmas of this year, we will have no more 3G in Australia as well. In Singapore, it's on the 31st of July of this year. So no more 3G. So if you go to Singapore and you don't have a 4G, 5G phone, you are not going to get service. If you're out at Sentosa, you want to buy a ticket, you want to work out where you are, you need to have a phone that will work. And that's just a function of new technologies. The mobile industry has a new G every 10 years. And it's one of the great things of the industry, but it's also one of the challenging things for consumers as part of that process. And so, broadcast television, analog broadcast television, is from the 1950s, right? And so, changing that, getting that new spectrum back is all really important as part of the process. And I think I do want to mention, because we focus on telecoms, but I think a number of your listeners will be interested in what's happening in satellite. And satellite also uses spectrum as well. And so what we're now seeing is all of the technology advances that have been occurring in the mobile industry, whether that's new technology, microprocessors, things on silicon, are now rolling into the satellite industry. So that's why we see the innovations from Starlink, from OneWeb, from a whole range of new satellite offerings that are coming. Kuiper from Amazon will be coming. There's a whole range of new technologies. And so, you see this competition occurring, at what we call multi-mode. So it's not just about operators in the mobile industry. You're also seeing competition from fixed, but you're also seeing competition from satellite services. And that's a big challenge for countries to say, well, how do we regulate that in that way? So I think that's also important. So getting this mix is right. So you can't stop technology, and it's how you manage it. And I think that's the key thing here. That a number of years ago, I said to Bangladesh, to at least one of the operators there, you don't need to do 3G. You could have jumped to 4G as part of the process, and that could have been done, because in reality, 3G is proved to be the technology where it's hasn't been the great step forward, when 4G is really much better and a lot more spectrally efficient as part of that process, and means a much lower cost per gigabyte. And that's fundamentally what people are now buying. If you're using, before it was about minutes and SMSs, now you're buying data. You're buying how many gigabytes, then you're using an app, whether that's WhatsApp. I'm not sure what the favorite in Bangladesh is. Maybe it's in China, it's WeChat. In other countries, it might be a whole range of Viber, Line here in Thailand, where I'm currently talking to you from. So all of these are competing devices, but they just use the data channel to deliver voice or video or messaging. Your favorite video, or your selfie that you've taken of your favorite outfit, or whatever the case may be, or in my case, good food photos. So all of those things are part of what we do with these devices.
Yeah, I can vouch for that. Good food photos are yours. Selfies probably mine.
Yeah.
Agreed on that.
I think the other thing I would say too, and I think this is really important to Smart Bangladesh, because you're such a mobile market, and there are a few mobile markets, mobile centric markets, where mobile is the key way that people access the internet. And actually, I think that's happening globally, to be honest. New, younger people don't use fixed phones, they don't use fixed devices. They like their mobile phones and mobile devices. And I did see a really good innovation where I think earlier in the year, the BTRC had supported fixed wireless access. And it's in some parts of the world it's called air fiber, right? And that's a good example. That's back to your backbone analogy. But what that allows is, instead of having to dig up the street, and it might be Bangladesh suffers from a lot of heavy rain. You have a development where people maybe are not looking after that trenching, so you get a lot of damage. So what you can do is you can have a fixed wireless access where that might be more than sufficient to run your small business, or it might be even a bigger business. You might get 500 megabits type access on a point-to-point basis using 5G as part of that process. So that's really important. I think one of the killer products that we see, um, even in markets like Australia, is fixed wireless access, what we call home broadband. But as I said, in the US people are calling it air fiber. So it's equivalent to a fiber offering, but it's delivered over wireless. So it might be you don't have the fixed network, but you can still have a very good service, irrespective of where you are. And I think that's really important.
I mean, you are right. We are actually, like I said, Bangladesh has a, we are actually very much dependent on mobile device. That is kind of the trend. We are
Mm,
actually trying to, our entire life is actually revolving around our mobile device that we use.
mm,
And especially, like I said, since we're going through this technological transformation, like many country already has, we're adopting technology. I
mm,
mean, every sector has touched technology, like e-commerce, the
mhm,
use of social media. People are doing businesses, making money only through e-commerce. There is something called f-commerce where you're just making money doing your business through a Facebook page. Social media has a
mhm,
huge impact, and again, these are actually people in living in villages and remote areas
mhm,
but using only a cell phone. I mean, not any other device. And then actually the most common ones that we use here are WhatsApp, Viber, Imo. Those are
mhm,
the ones, like in UAE, you cannot use WhatsApp. I think it's BOTIM. I mean, each country has kind of their own preferences depending on that. And like, again, more because, of these mobile financial services that was not there, which again boomed during COVID. Like, we are doing our banking through these
mhm,
apps. And again, these are apps that means, you are using your mobile device.
mhm,
They've now, Bangladesh, our central bank is giving license to digital banks. It's going to be like a wallet. Like, you have your QR code, your wallet, and you just, scan it and you're done. You're not having to pay anything. It's going straight from your bank. So it seems like we will need 5G. We will need smartphones. And I had no idea that, it is expensive, if you think of it, if from the other side, because now we were talking about from the consumer side. But if you're the corporate, if you're the telecommunication company or the regulator, I mean, it can be very expensive to cater in a market that has, demand for 2G, demand for 3G, demand for 4G. I actually didn't know that it was more challenging and expensive, but I can understand now why.
mhm,
But like I said, the way things are moving, I think within a very few years, these phones that are not compatible with 4G, 5G will actually become a bit redundant, even though they're less expensive, because of the fact that people are becoming more and more dependent on using their mobile device and doing their day-to-day work, starting from like I said, their business, their all that e-commerce, online shopping, studying. Like,
mhm,
kids are doing schools online.
Sure. Sure.
Then we're doing telemedicine. We're
Mm.
seeing doctors online,
Mhm.
and there is I really see it's only a matter of time, really, where, you know, and thanks to China, we have all these cheap smartphones, so which is again making things easier. But then again, you know, the durability is questionable. But a lot of it, people don't really care because, you know, you get the value for the money. I don't
Mhm.
mind changing a phone every year. That's fine. So a lot of people have that kind of mindset, which is fine. And because of this demand, actually, there are many other companies that are coming up with like, you know, that looks and feels like an iPhone, but
Mhm.
actually is not. So I mean, they don't last as long, but yeah, if you can maintain it, there are there. And like I said, the this generation and you know, the majority of the population of Bangladesh, because of this transition towards this technology layer, you know, they're making they are making a living out of
Sure.
using technology, and they need internet, and they need good connections, like, you know, to do customer delivery, to respond to customers, to, you know, to be prompt with the deliveries. You know, like I said, f-commerce is huge. They don't even have a website. They're just running their business through a Facebook page. And like if we have also seen, then there are these boom of content creators, YouTubers, who are like making money like crazy because of these contents they're creating and just putting it up there, and they're like having millions of views
Mhm.
within like an hour or something. I mean, who would have known that? Allah. But that's happening. We are there, and like, you know, there are other platforms that are popular here, TikTok,
Yep. Sure.
the digital content. Like I said, there we have now a new, like you could say, a lot of people, for a lot of people, it's career. Like, what do you do? I'm a content creator. I'm an
Mhm.
influencer. I mean, 15 years ago, we would have been like, what? What's a content creator? What do you mean by an influencer?
Sure.
But
Sure.
yeah, and of course, we are moving forward, which is great. But I think we just need to be a bit careful because, like I said, you know, with e-commerce, when you're selling online, a lot of times you have seen you don't get what you see. So, you know, sometimes you think you're going to get this, but you know, when it's actually in front of your face, you're like, okay, this is not even the color, forget the product. And
Mm.
if you don't have a good refund policy, that can be a challenge. So again, then like I said, these platforms only communicate through you know, internet of things, through using a device which they need internet. So
Mm.
it is very important now for Bangladesh, for this economy, because a big chunk of our economy is now depending on
Mhm.
using technology to run their businesses, to,
Mhm.
you know, to have a living, to, like I said, to even, you know, get learn a new skill, to
Mm.
get medical help, to study, to do schooling. So a lot of these sectors are now, like I say every time, like, you know, there's nothing called IT sector anymore.
Mm.
Every sector is IT sector. They're using some sort of, you know, IT solutions to run their business. And I think, like I said, of course, we are not there, but I think if with the right kind of mindset, we can reach there. But along with the government, I think the government has a big role to play here, and
Mm.
that is why I'd like my that is going to be my last question to you. Like, you know, of course, it will take some time. Like, you know, from people to moving from we have seen like the government, you know, a lot of government services have moved to
Mhm.
digital versions. You know, every single government offices have their online portal. But of course, we as users have to also have that kind of mindset. And I think with the guidance and the significant role that our government can play in making that happen will actually help this. So I want to ask you, because, like, you know, you have seen this happen in many countries, and you have, like I
Mm.
said, it's regulated everywhere, and the government does have a role to play in this. So can you tell us, like, to make this a conducive environment for spectrum management? I mean, what should the government's role be here,
Sure,
especially when the government has this kind of vision, and where we can completely see that technology is going to be used. It's the way of life. It's
sure.
not a choice, or like it's not like an option. It's like for everyone. And with, like I said, digital banks, it's even the remotest of the remotest area people. We want to touch them, we want to give them access to this technology. So how can government make it easier,
Sure,
or
sure.
should they
Well,
play?
let's talk about a few of those things, and some of them are not really as much on spectrum, but let's talk about them for a minute. The key thing is that anything that during the pandemic, anything that could go online went online, right? And that's a real common thing that occurred in many
Yeah,
countries.
yeah.
The real challenge, I think, though, for online services is having digital ID, right? And having all of those things, what we call KYC in terms of online banking, know your customer, and having that, for whether it's a digital, taking your IC card, and making sure that that's transformed into a digital world as part of that process. So, for example, at the moment in Australia, we now get our driving licenses as a card on your mobile phone. Now, that's another challenge because in case your mobile phone, your battery dies, you may not be able to show, that you've got a driving license. But that's another question. But all of those, I think those sort of transactional things online really require a trusted type of environment. And so things like digital ID are part of that process. But let's talk about spectrum, and I think that part of the focus here, if we're looking at spectrum, though, is government's going to have to facilitate that transition, um, and you've got to be careful that Bangladesh doesn't become a digital dumping ground. That as other countries switch off 2G and 3G, that you're not seeing all of these people who are sold that this is a great device very cheaply, and they're getting a device that's not going to work for a long period of time. So what we see in many countries, and Vietnam is a good example, Malaysia is another example, where there's actually a prohibition on certain devices being sold that don't have 4G capability. 4G is going to be with us for a lot longer yet. So I think 5G is nice to have, but 4G is really the key point here. The other thing I really like to see as well is looking at some of the unlicensed services. We haven't spoken about that in Spectrum, because Spectrum, with all this demand, we've got to have more sharing. So how do we share? We do things where we have low power devices, and what Bangladesh hasn't done, as I understand it, has you don't you around the world you currently can't use Wi-Fi 6 or Wi-Fi 7 in Bangladesh. The decision was taken on World Telecoms Day on May 17 in Pakistan to support the lower 500 megahertz of the 6 gigahertz being available for unlicensed low power devices. So in Southeast Asia, Malaysia, Singapore, Thailand, and last week, the Philippines have all approved that process to allow low power devices in that. So that will actually get better Wi Fi. So if you're using Wi Fi and you are deploying a new Wi Fi device, maybe it's in a village or a community setting or a school, then you'll get the latest technology as part of that process. And that will support higher speeds that those devices. So I think it's not just about mobiles; it's also about other parts of the spectrum band which are really important. Internet of Things you mentioned. Internet of Things is really important for, I think, in a country like Bangladesh, because if you get those sensors out there, you can support agriculture, you can support rainfall, you can support. There's a heat wave occurring in much of the world, in the Middle East and other parts. So you can have these sensors, and they only use a very small amount of spectrum as part of that, because it's like telling it's a device saying, oh, I'm 40 degrees, I'm 41 degrees, or whatever the case may be, or I'm having rainfall, or this is how that, and those things then go into the modeling, which will help, actively, help with agriculture, but also avoid some natural disasters and improve the environment and all those other elements as part of this process too. We're very fortunate in Australia because of the way that we use the 700 megahertz, which is not yet available in Bangladesh. Two-thirds of the Australian landmass is now has Internet of Things access, what we call NB-IoT. Um, and so that's a very narrow band, NB, narrow band, Internet of Things, and that allows sensing technology right through two-thirds of the Australian landmass. So that's a huge amount of space. So the whole of Bangladesh, if you wanted to, could be with inside NB-IoT if that investment's made. 700 megahertz is a very good band to put that in, and then that would support, smart metering, climate change monitoring, rainfall monitoring, heat monitoring, improving your weather forecasts, helping out farmers and all of those other people. So, I want to get that into the discussion today too. That it's also important to have all of these other services that use the spectrum as a platform, and I think that's really the key point here from my perspective, that, if you get that right, then you're getting the investment in these things that then people have got that platform. So, I'm hoping, and I suppose what I'm really saying is while I understand people's natural social interactions, and I'm hoping that we're not just doing new technologies and 4G and 5G for the latest fashion or the latest, movie, right? There's a lot of value to people, in various sectors. Agriculture, Bangladesh is a huge, textiles, clothing, and footwear. Your ability, even at a small, fabricator, to pick up the latest design being delivered over the phone over the internet, to running. I've been stuck in traffic in many places when I've been in Dhaka. How do we use logistics to improve that delivery system? How do we do things maybe on a different time basis? So all of those different things can help the economy and people in a different way. So not just the latest famous, movie that they can watch. I think there's a lot of productive things as well, that I think government needs to encourage, making some of its data available as part of that process, but making sure that in maybe that pricing of spectrum, it's not just about maximizing the value, but also saying, well, how do we get this platform for young Bangladeshis who are innovative, who are born global, born mobile, as part of that process, to actually have the platform so that they can interact and add value to their lives.
You are right, and actually, there is another particular area that, which is why I am so much interested in this, because I think this particular sector can benefit a lot, and I think it's the legal landscape here. I mean, to improve access to justice and enhance the efficiency of legal processes in Bangladesh. I think because I believe that technology and innovation together, having this merge of technology and innovation, the legal sector can also improve in our country, and access to justice can also be improved, and which is why this spectrum management is so important for the judicial system of
Hmm.
Bangladesh as well. And that is why actually I was particularly interested in exploring this intersection of spectrum management
Hmm.
and legal innovation with you, Scott. And you have actually rightly said that we do want. I do want fashion in movies, of course.
Hmm.
In addition to that, we can use this it does match with our vision, like of smart cities, of having
Hmm.
smarter way to learn, for education, for healthcare,
Hmm.
e-government, digital economy. Uh, all these can be
Absolutely.
used, but it actually depends on the individual self. like, what do I want to use this 5G for? Is this something that I'm just going to use, watch it for movies and or sports
mm,
games, live games, all the time? Or am I going to use it, like I said, like I want to reduce the gap of from access to justice. I want to merge law and technology so that
mhm.
we can improve our judicial system. And
Sure.
it actually depends on that particular individual, our mindset. And we need guidance from experts like you. We can see how other our neighboring countries have used
Mm,
this, what worked, what failed, because like we all know there are some challenges. There will be some cons to the pros, and we have to address those also. And like make it actually depends on us, whether am I going to be using this technology and like hack websites, or am I going to use this technology to innovate something new and make more money in the legit way, or create something that will help, for example, like a solution that will help the legal judicial system,
sure.
or control the traffic uh,
Mm,
in a way, so that we can get live updates on traffic,
mm.
because
Sure,
traffic,
sure.
all big cities suffer from this. And
But well, maybe let me just jump in if I can, because I want to address this legal question, which I think is really important. And I've been involved in a couple of federal court cases in Australia where we do use new technologies. You can watch the hearings, you can do all of those things online. Certainly, all documents are now completely done online in terms of discovery. It just stops the paper war and chopping down trees. But it does require an investment by not only individuals but law firms, but by government. It's the same thing. Some work I've been doing recently for the ITU in the Pacific. One of the things we had to upgrade for healthcare was inside the hospital, right? So you wanted to be able to access a specialist out in a remote island, but you
Exactly.
actually had to have the terminals and the bandwidth to support that doctor giving advice, so that you can see clearly the skin color, or good for quality photographs of the injury, so you can give very quick triage type advice. So it's not just, I think this is where government's also got to think about, if you provide justice system or healthcare or education, it's really important that schools are online, that hospitals are online, that healthcare and medical centers are online. And certainly in relation to the legal system, um, you know, there's a great line that that what is it? Is that sunlight is the great advantage. If you see, you can actually log online and people talk about a court case, you can actually see it. You get more people logging in to see how justice is done. I think we could probably improve the legal profession across the board. It's very slow. I think justice in every country could be a lot faster. But I think they're the sort of things that where you do get real transformational change, right? We're not just doing things, faster. We're actually saying, well, with new technologies, we need to redesign things in a different way. And I think that's really important, and I think I see that's really, part of the value of this technology, that it's not just doing what we were doing a little bit better, but how do we do it, in a much better and transformational way to achieve economic benefits, productivity improvements, societal interactions as part of that process. I think that's and that's one of the reasons I've certainly been enjoyed my time in the industry. That change has been really, and seeing that those benefits are really, really important.
Like I said, Scott, it's almost an hour, and like I said, feels like we just started talking. There were so many areas we did not even touch upon. Like I said, it's not possible to cover everything in an hour, but
Sure.
I hope people get some idea on its importance and start thinking about these things, like to create an awareness about that we might not be able to do everything by ourselves. So that is when we need to kind of collaborate. We need to start thinking about collaborating. We need to think about public private partnerships, and to make it more available. Like I know that is actually also my vision. In even in UAE, there is no physical court, no physical court. Everything is virtual. And like if you are if you have committed an offense today, within 2 days, you're like you have the hearing, your judgment is done, and your punishment is done, everything is done in 2 days. And here in Bangladesh, like we hear cases that, like 30 years, and they're still going on without any kind of idea when it's going to end. So I mean, there are many things that if can be done, and we are hopeful that I think, like I said, spectrum management is the invisible backbone, or the secret sauce,
Hmm.
or the secret sauce, invisible backbone, or
Yeah.
the main criteria
I
criteria
think
to call it.
I suppose whatever term you use, it's all about that last mile connectivity, right? And how does it do that in a way which is really cost effective? And that's really what we're talking about.
Yeah.
So we can use different terminologies, whatever you want to do, but it's how do we maximize and have these devices and connect ourselves with people and the world? And I think that's the key point.
Absolutely. And the fact that it is the backbone for all this to happen, if you can manage this spectrum in an effective manner, then,
Mhm.
all these can happen. So, I mean, thank you, Scott, for sharing, these valuable insights and your time with us today. And I do believe that with the right strategies and, like I said, collaborations and public-private partnerships, and engaging the key stakeholders in this, whenever we're making policies and everything, engaging the key stakeholders with the right approach, I think Bangladesh can achieve, the smart nation goals that it has kind of set out for it. And if like I said, a lot of people probably had no idea that the backbone for all of that to happen is spectrum.
Mhm.
So I mean, that is why I wanted to do this, so that people
No,
actually know it's not just it's not, everything is not that simple. You know there are certain things that need to happen for something else to happen. There are many players that are working behind the scenes, that when we see a movie, we see two people, but behind that there are like 100 crew members who are making that happen.
sure.
So spectrum is kind of like that for this
It's
smart
very important.
Bangladesh nation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Look, let me just close off from my end to say thank you very much for the opportunity. It's been a pleasure. What I would say is, I think the development of Bangladesh over the last 20 years is partly, if not, one of the key drivers has been the mobile industry, that it's
Yeah.
really created that platform for
True.
connectivity. And it probably doesn't get the accolades that it should as part of that process. But certainly spectrum is important. You have good institutions like the BTRC who
Yes.
are changing their appreciation of
Yes.
how spectrum should be allocated, and but more to happen. And ultimately it's about providing that spectrum to the benefit of the people, benefit of the economy, and using it in not just telecoms but also for radio communications across the board. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Scott, and thank you everyone who joined us today. And I hope you found this episode informative and insightful. And that's a good night from us. Stay safe and stay secure.
Stay
Bye.
safe. Bye.